Ásia-Pacífico e Índico. Após o pronunciamento das autoridades da mesa de abertura, teremos a palestra intitulada Pandemias como Desafios Globais, Gestão de Crises Internacionais em Saúde, ministrada por Bob Reinalda, da Radboud University na Holanda. Para a abertura do evento, passo a palavra para a reitora da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, professora Sandra Regina Goulart Almeida.
Bom dia a todos e a todas, uma grande satisfação abrir este evento que tem por objetivo o lançamento da coleção Desafios Globais. Eu gostaria de começar cumprimentando o professor Aziz Saliba, nosso diretor de Relações Internacionais, e também o professor Davidson Belém Lopes, nosso diretor adjunto de Relações Internacionais. Eu agradeço aos dois por terem abraçado esse projeto, que é tão importante para a nossa instituição e também para o nosso país, em um momento de reflexões profundas com relação aos vários desafios globais que todos nós temos enfrentando. Um cumprimento especial ao professor Flávio de Lemos Cassalade, que é o nosso diretor aqui da editora UFMG, uma editora que nos orgulha muito pelo seu trabalho, pela sua presença no cenário nacional e também internacional. Mesmo em tempos de pandemia, a editora publicou dois livros, publicou muito mais do que dois, mas dois que serão, com certeza, um marco na história da editora e muito importante para a nossa instituição. No ano passado, nós tivemos o lançamento do livro Orbe Encruzilhada, que comemorou os 300 anos de Minas Gerais. Um contexto muito difícil para celebrar os 300 anos do Estado de Minas Gerais, mas nós não poderíamos nos furtar de fazer uma reflexão e que deixasse essa reflexão registrada em um livro da nossa editora. Então, professor Flávio, muito obrigada por ter abraçado também essa proposta do livro que comemora os 300 anos, que comemorou os 300 anos do Estado de Minas Gerais, e agora também endossou e nos brindou com essa coletânea de 6 volumes sobre os desafios globais. Muito obrigada pela parceria, por ter, de fato, nos colocado, abraçado essa proposta em momentos tão difíceis. Os nossos agradecimentos a todos na nossa editora UFMG, que, como eu disse, nos orgulha tanto, né? E que sabemos fez um trabalho extraordinário para conseguir produzir esses dois, primeiro esse livro sobre Orbe Encruzilhada e esses 6 volumes sobre os desafios globais em tempos tão adversos. Muito obrigada. E cumprimento também de forma muito especial o nosso palestrante de hoje, professor Bob Reinalda, um prazer tê-lo aqui conosco, vai falar de uma temática muito importante para nós, uma reflexão essencial nesses momentos de pandemia, pandemias como desafios globais, gestão de crises internacionais em saúde. Muito obrigada, professor Bob Reinalda, por aceitar o nosso convite, estar aqui conosco hoje, comemorando o lançamento dessa coleção Desafios Globais. Eu gostaria de começar mencionando que, apesar deste ser um dia de grande satisfação por estarmos lançando esses 6 volumes dessa coleção, que teve a contribuição de vários membros da nossa comunidade interna e também vários parceiros da UFMG no campo das relações internacionais, este é um momento de grande tristeza para todos nós, né? Principalmente para nós aqui no Brasil, que atravessamos um período muito difícil da pandemia, um recrudescimento seríssimo da pandemia, da coronavírus, e que do coronavírus, da Covid-19, que tem colocado todos os nossos estados, a nossa comunidade, a nossa sociedade em alerta, e temos grandes desafios pela frente diante desse momento. Claro que nós gostaríamos de ter a oportunidade de lançar essa coletânea, primeiro de forma presencial, né? Segundo, em um momento que fosse mais apropriado, que não estivesse num pico tão drástico da pandemia aqui no Brasil. Então, eu gostaria de começar me solidarizando com todos aquelas que perderam entes queridos durante essa pandemia, né? No Brasil, Brasil já são mais de 265 mil mortes pela pandemia, um contexto extremamente preocupante, né, que envolve a todos nós e que requer de todos nós uma posição muito firme para que nós possamos atender a tudo que está posto para a nossa sociedade nesse momento tão desafiador. E também a minha solidariedade a todos aqueles que têm sofrido os efeitos dessa pandemia. Nós sabemos que essa pandemia ela é não apenas uma crise sanitária, ela é a maior crise humanitária, maior crise social dos últimos tempos, né? E como toda crise humanitária, como toda crise social, ela afeta diretamente as populações mais vulneráveis. Aqui no Brasil é visível como essa pandemia tem afetado as pessoas mais pobres, as populações negras, populações indígenas, as mulheres, principalmente, em função da feminização da pobreza, e que tem também impactado enormemente no trabalho e na luta pela igualdade de gênero das mulheres. No dia 8 de março, celebramos o Dia Internacional das Mulheres, mas num contexto muito triste, num contexto de grandes retrocessos em função da pandemia, em função de toda essa situação social que nós estamos vivendo. Então, a todos aqueles e aquelas que estão afetados, e a população é enorme aqui no Brasil, a nossa solidariedade. A UFMG, como universidade pública, é um patrimônio do nosso país, ela está firmemente localizada em nossa cidade, em nosso estado, e ela tem feito o que é possível para poder minimizar um pouco os efeitos dessa pandemia para a nossa sociedade. Desde o início da pandemia, desde o ano passado, a UFMG mudou, se transformou no sentido de migrar para o contexto virtual, e desde então nós temos atuado fortemente no enfrentamento da Covid-19. São mais de 200 ações em todas as áreas do conhecimento, inclusive na área de testagem. A UFMG é uma das instituições que mais fazem testes da Covid-19, na interpretação de dados estatísticos sobre a pandemia, na análise de várias ações de medicamentos, na análise de possíveis candidatas vacinais, né? O UFMG tem 7 candidatas vacinais agora, trabalhando arduamente para que nós possamos contribuir para que nós não tenhamos o cenário que está colocado hoje em dia para todos nós, que é uma escassez de vacina, uma necessidade urgente de vacinar a nossa população, e um risco enorme das variantes que se espalham pelo território nacional, que colocam em risco não apenas o Brasil, mas também a humanidade como um todo, né? E eu acho que esse é o contexto, um contexto muito triste para todos nós, e um contexto que nos faz refletir mais ainda sobre os desafios globais que temos pela frente, né? Dito isso, eu gostaria de dizer que essa coletânea ela traz para o centro das reflexões algo que para nós é muito caro e que nós temos dito desde o início da pandemia. Nós só conseguiremos enfrentar essa pandemia se nós agirmos de forma integrada e colaborativa. E aqui eu falo como indivíduos que somos, né? Nós temos que agir de forma colaborativa, eu me protejo, eu faço distanciamento social, eu uso máscara porque eu estou não apenas protegendo a mim mesma, mas eu estou protegendo também aqueles ao meu redor. Então, é uma ação de colaboração entre indivíduos. Como instituições, o que a UFMG tem procurado fazer, e aqui eu agradeço mais uma vez o trabalho da Diretoria de Relações Internacionais, que desde o início da pandemia tem atuado fortemente com os nossos parceiros, trocando experiências, aprendendo também com aqueles que já estavam à frente no enfrentamento da Covid-19, e hoje também essa reflexão que nós trazemos hoje é resultado dessas parcerias que nós temos. Nós só poderemos, da mesma forma, enfrentar esses momentos difíceis se nós, como instituições, fazermos valer todas as cooperações que nós temos tido em vários cenários. E quando falamos de colaboração, cooperação internacional, nós temos que falar sempre em um contexto de solidariedade. Ninguém pode ficar sozinho nesse momento. E as nossas instituições têm um papel central na liderança dessa reflexão. Nós somos instituições de ciência, somos instituições de saber, e que precisamos liderar essa reflexão em nossos países, em nossos contextos políticos, né? Trabalhando junto com o poder público nesse enfrentamento que é essa maior crise humanitária dos últimos anos. Então, nós temos que agir de forma colaborativa como indivíduos, como instituição e como países também. Os nossos países têm que colaborar. Nós não podemos pensar, por exemplo, na vacina apenas em um contexto nacional. Isso é impossível. Se nós não conseguirmos debelar essa pandemia nos países de forma geral, todos estarão enfrentando o mesmo problema daqui a alguns anos novamente. Então, essa tem que ser uma ação global, uma ação que tem que envolver todos os países, todas as instituições, tem que ser, como eu tenho dito, mutirão de todos. Essa é uma frase do nosso escritor Guimarães Rosa, um dos grandes escritores, falando aqui professor Bob Reinalda, um dos grandes escritores da literatura brasileira, ex-aluno da UFMG, formado em medicina, foi diplomata também, uma pessoa que teve um papel muito importante na cooperação internacional entre nosso país e outras nações, e ele escreveu um livro em que ele dizia que a vida, a gente não pode prever o que vai acontecer na vida, mas nós sabemos de uma coisa, ela começa, ela interrompe, nós não sabemos quando ela vai recomeçar, mas de uma coisa nós sabemos, que a vida, ela é mutirão de todos, né? Então, esse tem sido muito meu mote, quando eu falo desse momento, desses desafios globais que nós temos vivido. A vida é mutirão de todos. E é mutirão de todos no plano individual, no plano das relações institucionais entre nossas várias instituições, no plano das relações entre nossas instituições e o poder público, né, que nós temos que apoiar o poder público e mesmo fornecer as bases para que o poder público faça a coisa certa, e nós temos também que fazer esse mutirão de todos com países. E é nesse contexto que eu vejo também essa contribuição dessa coletânea. É uma coletânea que faz uma reflexão, que pensa os desafios globais em uma perspectiva transversal, em vários temas, e são temas que são todos muito relacionados com o momento que nós vivemos, meio ambiente, direitos humanos, segurança. Então, são várias questões que nos falam muito de perto nesse momento que nós vivemos. Então, com essas palavras, eu agradeço mais uma vez a contribuição de todos que colaboraram para que essa coletânea pudesse se concretizar através desses 6 volumes que fazem essa reflexão no campo da saúde, como eu disse, direitos humanos, no campo da questão de internacionalização específica, que fala das várias regiões geopolíticas do nosso país, num contexto também transversal e global. Isso para nós é muito importante. Toda a contribuição foi importantíssima para a construção dessa reflexão conjunta, que é o começo de uma outra reflexão que nós teremos que fazer daqui para frente. Ela marca o momento, mas ela não para aqui. Ela nos vai dar subsídios contínuos para que nós possamos fazer uma reflexão para o futuro. Nós temos que pensar o que fizemos no passado, o que fizemos, inclusive, de errado. Tivemos uma palestra recente do Ailton Krenak, um líder indígena, de uma comunidade indígena muito importante no nosso estado, e que ele disse isso: nós não temos como voltar ao normal depois de tudo que nós passamos, nós temos que ter aprendido com esses momentos que nós estamos vivendo, dessa pandemia tão triste. Então, essa coletânea, ela nos traz uma reflexão que é do passado, do que foi feito, do momento que nós estamos vivendo, mas também para o futuro, pensando que nós temos que pensar num contexto em que, das futuras gerações, né, o que queremos para as gerações vindouras, que país, que nação, que planeta nós queremos construir para as gerações que estão vindo depois dessa pandemia, que tem impactado jovens, adultos e crianças também. Então, mais uma vez, eu agradeço a oportunidade de estar aqui, a oportunidade de ter prefaciado essa coletânea, que com certeza será muito importante para a nossa instituição também, para o poder público e para as nossas parceiras. Agradeço mais uma vez todo o trabalho da DRI, nas pessoas do professor Aziz, professor Davidson, Diretoria de Relações Internacionais, que esteve muito envolvida com esse projeto, e também da nossa editora UFMG. Então, muito obrigada, eu retorno a palavra para a Vanessa, para a condução dos trabalhos. Eu desejo a todos um excelente evento, e para mim é um orgulho imenso estar aqui e ver esse projeto sendo realizado com tanta qualidade, com tanta importância nesse momento tão triste da história da humanidade do nosso país. Muito obrigada.
Com a palavra, o diretor de Relações Internacionais da UFMG, professor Aziz Saliba.
bom dia, uma boa tarde, no caso do professor Bob Reinalda. Queria iniciar saudando a nossa magnífica reitora, professora Sandra Regina Goulart de Almeida. Eu acredito que o meu vídeo não esteja funcionando. Pronto, agora vou saudar também, além da nossa reitora, a professora Sandra Goulart, o meu querido companheiro de DRI, professor Davidson Lopes. Saúdo também o professor Flávio Cassalardi, diretor da nossa editora UFMG, que tanto nos apoiou nessa empreitada. Quero também consignar minhas saudações ao professor Bob Reinalda, a quem teremos o prazer de ouvir daqui a pouco. E, claro, não posso deixar de agradecer a todas e todos que nos acompanham, com minhas desculpas por não nominá-los para não incorrer em enormes falhas. É com muita satisfação que nós completaremos, neste mês de março, 3 anos à frente da Diretoria de Relações Internacionais. A caminhada tem sido dura, tem sido árdua, mas em nenhum momento ela foi solitária. Professora Sandra, que nos honrou com o convite para cuidarmos dos assuntos internacionais da UFMG, e o professor Davidson, meu amigo, diretor adjunto, são grandes companheiros nesta jornada. E no mundo mais complexo e interdependente, precisamos que nossa universidade esteja cada vez mais internacionalizada, ou seja, com maior diversidade linguística e incremento de seu fluxo internacional de pessoas, cultura, ideias e conhecimento. Acreditamos que isso nos deixa mais aptos a responder os desafios de nossa sociedade e de nosso tempo. Imbuídos deste propósito de tornar nossa UFMG mais internacionalizada, realizamos uma série de ações nestes últimos 3 anos. Permitam-me, de forma muito breve, ressaltar 5 delas. Nós implementamos uma formação transversal em estudos internacionais, elevando o número de disciplinas em língua estrangeira em nossa universidade, aumentando a diversidade do nosso corpo discente e oportunizando uma experiência internacional em casa, além de congregar aqueles que querem melhor compreender o mundo. Trabalhamos na reformulação de nossa resolução de acolhimento de imigrantes estrangeiros em situação de vulnerabilidade. E a concorrência no processo seletivo foi cerca de 100 vezes maior do que nos anos precedentes. Celebramos acordos de intercâmbio docente com as universidades de Glasgow, Southampton, no Reino Unido, Renmin, na China, Universidade da Ásia Central, Universidade Autônoma de México, que nos permitirão receber e enviar professores para atividades de ensino, pesquisa e extensão em diferentes áreas. Além de um tradicional programa de cátedras com a Embaixada da França, estabelecemos outros, com a Fulbright, do governo americano, com o Ramban, do governo chinês, com o Acnur, das Nações Unidas, e um centro de excelência da União Europeia, coordenado pela minha querida amiga, professora Jamile Mata Dias. Essa terrível pandemia, que tanto sofrimento trouxe para a humanidade, também afetou nossas atividades. Por solicitação de nossa reitora, fizemos contato com mais de 280 membros de nossa comunidade que se encontravam no exterior, prestando-lhes nosso apoio na máxima medida possível. Há 1 ano, trabalhamos para adaptar nossa internacionalização ao modo virtual e buscamos formas de cooperação que possam, inclusive, sobreviver à forçosa paralisação da mobilidade que ora vivenciamos. A 5ª ação que destacarei aqui é a razão do evento que hoje realizamos, a Coleção Desafios Globais. É mais um relevante projeto para a internacionalização de nossa universidade e, sobre este projeto, destacarei 3 pontos. O primeiro deles é que a Coleção Desafios Desafios Globais, como todas as iniciativas que mencionei anteriormente, é o produto de um trabalho coletivo. A coleção nasceu em uma conversa minha, de Davidson, com nossa reitora, avançou com sugestões dos coordenadores dos Centros de Estudos Regionais, professores Bárbara Orfanó, Jamile Mata Dias, Aristóteles Góes Neto, Eduardo Bastianeto, Manuel Santos, Marcos Alexandre, e com os diretores da Editora UFMG, professor Flávio Cassalardi e Camila Figueiredo. E se concretizou com a contribuição de 130 autores, bem como grande trabalho dos organizadores e o inestimável apoio da nossa dirigente equipe da DRI, em especial Tatiana Marques, Luciana Fiuza, Theo Carvalho e Débora Evelyn. A todas e todos eu quero registrar o meu agradecimento. Segundo ponto, a coleção é um exercício de reflexão e diálogo. Tomamos por base o trabalho do PRINT, Programa de Internacionalização da Pós-Graduação do UFMG, para localizar os temas que enfeixariam a maior parte das pesquisas de nossa universidade, complementando de forma a abarcar também a nossa riquíssima extensão. Assim, nosso rol de temas é sustentabilidade, saúde e bem-estar, direitos humanos, novas tecnologias e fronteiras da ciência, instituições, governança e regulação, educação, cultura e arte. Além de fomentar o debate entre nós, membros da comunidade da UFMG, sobre questões de relevância global, quisemos também contemplar as posições de parceiros e outros importantes atores do cenário internacional. Esperamos, assim, ampliar o alcance das discussões e promover ainda mais engajamento nestes debates. Um polímata bengali, Rabindranath Tagore, de certa feita afirmou que compreendemos mal o mundo e depois dizemos que ele nos decepciona. Com estes debates, quizá possamos contribuir para diminuir a decepção com o mundo. Terceiro, no momento em que a Diretoria de Relações Internacionais da UFMG se aproxima de seus 20 anos de existência, são inegáveis sua potência e seu potencial. Sua potência se manifesta em mais de 450 parcerias distribuídas em 60 países. Seu potencial se manifesta nos resultados que colhemos ao propormos desafios aos membros de nossa comunidade e aos parceiros. Evidentemente, somos tributários das contribuições que foram dadas por todas e todos que nos antecederam, como é o caso da primeira diretora de Relações Internacionais de nossa universidade, professora Sandra Almeida, hoje nossa reitora. Por toda a história e pelo presente, eu manifesto meu orgulho em pertencer a uma universidade que muito fez e que, mesmo diante de enormes dificuldades de toda sorte, muito faz. Quero encerrar reiterando meus agradecimentos a todas e todos que estiveram conosco nesta empreitada, bem como aqueles que hoje nela embarcam. Eu confesso para vocês que encerraria citando Schopenhauer, que afirmou que as pessoas tomam os limites de seu próprio campo de visão pelos limites do mundo, e concluiria que com a internacionalização do UFMG e com esta coleção temos o ambicioso objetivo de contribuir para o alargamento dos limites de visão de todos que se disponham a participar conosco. Mas, depois de ouvir a menção ao nosso maior escritor, Guimarães Rosa, eu finalizarei com um pequeno trecho do livro Magma, o qual conheci por intermédio de uma querida professora de literatura, porque eu só preciso de pés livres, de mãos dadas e de olhos bem abertos. Muito obrigado.
Passo a palavra ao diretor da Editora UFMG, professor Flávio de Lemos Cassalade.
Bom dia a todas e a todas. Quero saudar a nossa reitora, a professora Sandra, meus colegas da Diretoria de Relações Internacionais, professor Aziz, professor Davidson, nosso palestrante, professor Reinalda. As minhas palavras vão ser muito breves, eu acho que elas são coerentes com a missão da editora, que é deixar os autores falarem, fazer brilhar o conhecimento e fazê-lo presente o mais próximo possível das bibliotecas de todos que necessitam desses conhecimentos. Eu gostaria apenas de ressaltar a importância da editora UFMG, que é hoje uma das mais prestigiosas editoras universitárias do Brasil, com 30 anos de idade, de luta, e que tem um acervo de mais de 1.200 livros em seu catálogo, o que mostra a pujança dos esforços que a Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais vem fazendo durante todo esse tempo. Inclusive, nesse momento, com os nossos esforços de internacionalização e de estar presente na difusão do conhecimento em todo o mundo. Tenho que reconhecer a importância do trabalho brilhantemente conduzido pelo professor Aziz, pelo professor Davidson e pelo pessoal da Diretoria de Relações Internacionais, orquestrando esse livro. Quando eu falo orquestrando, o termo me parece muito mais apropriado do que organizado, porque não é fácil congregar 130 autores em torno de vários temas e conseguir com isso uma obra que tem uma coerência interna muito grande e que tem uma consistência também muito grande. A editora fica feliz de poder participar disso e quero aproveitar também para agradecer todo o pessoal interno da editora da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, que trabalhou muito para que esse livro pudesse sair. Bom, então estamos felizes com mais essa contribuição, e especialmente nesse momento, que, como disse a professora Sandra, é um momento de solidariedade. Então, a gente espera poder ter dado voz aos autores, que é o que mais nos importa, e estarmos de mãos dadas com o mundo, e através de nossos autores, com cada um de nossos irmãos mundo afora. Obrigado.
Eu agradeço a participação da professora Sandra, professor Aziz e professor Flávio na mesa de abertura. E agora eu passo a palavra ao diretor adjunto de Relações Internacionais e editor da coleção Desafios Globais, professor Davidson Belém Lopes, para a apresentação da palestra Pandemias como Desafios Globais, Gestão de Crises Internacionais em Saúde, ministrada por Bob Reinalda, da Radboud University na Holanda.
Muito obrigado, Vanessa. Muito bom dia a todas, todos. Uma honra enorme para mim poder assumir o leme nesta segunda parte da nossa sessão oficial de lançamento da coleção Desafios Globais. Permitam-me saudar e agradecer os que me precederam, professora Sandra Goulart Almeida, reitora da UFMG, professor Flávio Cassalade, diretor da editora UFMG, e o meu amigo de longa data, coeditor da coleção Desafios Globais, diretor de Relações Internacionais da UFMG, professor Aziz Saliba. A partir deste momento, nós nos dedicaremos a uma discussão mais propriamente acadêmica e vamos falar, possivelmente, sobre o grande desafio global do tempo presente, aquele que nos toca a todos, que chega aos 4 quadrantes do planeta e que, em intensidades maiores ou menores, alcança todo e cada ser humano, alcança a humanidade. Estou me referindo à pandemia de Covid-19, e as maneiras como os diferentes povos no mundo a têm enfrentado. Vamos falar sobre esse tema e sobre as implicações nos vários âmbitos humanitário, social, econômico, pelos próximos 30, 40 minutos. E me dá uma satisfação enorme poder recepcionar na UFMG, ainda que virtualmente, o palestrante desta manhã no Brasil, tarde na Europa, onde ele se encontra, na Holanda, o professor Bob Reinalda. Bob é um amigo de muito tempo, com quem nós temos podido contribuir, colaborar ao longo dos anos, e quando me refiro a nós, não é um plural majestático, ele é um amigo da UFMG, ele esteve conosco há alguns anos no nosso campus, participou de uma série de atividades e conosco, com os nossos estudantes, professores, tem mantido relações colaborativas na pesquisa, sobretudo. Permitam-me apresentar o Bob, mas antes de fazê-lo, eu quero deixar que todos saibam, informar que existe uma versão, uma transmissão desta cerimônia que está sendo vertida para o inglês. Não é? Então, nós temos um serviço de tradução simultânea para aqueles que prefiram acompanhar em português ou inglês. As transmissões estão disponíveis no nosso canal no YouTube, o canal da DRI, www.youtube.com/DRI UFMG Goes Global, youtube.com/DRI UFMG Goes Global. Para quem, então, quiser fazer essa mudança, eu dou o tempo, 5 segundos, fiquem à vontade para fazer essa mudança da transmissão, porque a partir de agora a cerimônia muda para o inglês. And so I switch to English, and I have the honor and the privilege to welcome to UFMG Professor Bob Reinalda. Bob, I was telling the audience that we have been friends for a long while, and that you are a friend of UFMG, as a matter of fact. You have come to Brazil a couple of times, into UFMG a few years back, and ever since then, we have maintained a very strong, a very dense, thick cooperation over time. And now we could not think of a better person, of a better researcher, a better name to represent this collective effort, in as much as you represent for us, for Aziz and I, the idea of erudition, rigor, and friendliness. So this is why we have thought of you to deliver this keynote speech, and fortunately, you have accepted our invitation. Thank you very much for joining us on this very, very important occasion for us, for the UFMG community, and for the two of us, Aziz and I, all the authors. We are really proud and happy to have you as our lecture giver this morning. Please allow me to introduce Professor Bob Reinalda's CV. It's a very dense biography, so I'll stick to a few points. Professor Reinalda, he has studied political science and international relations and social history at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and holds a PhD in social sciences from the Universiteit Groningen in the Netherlands. Reinalda has published extensively about autonomous policymaking, of decision-making within and implementation by international organizations, both intergovernmental and non-governmental. He is the author of the Routledge History of International Organizations from 1815 to the present day, which is a reference work for all of those who have an interest in IOs. Along with Kent Gill and Jesse Eisenberg, He's also an editor of IO-Bio, the Biographical Dictionary of Secretary General of International Organizations, a multinational research project involving contributors from every corner of the world. Bob Reinalda is a fellow and senior researcher at the Department of Public Administration and Political Science of Radboud University Nijmegen. As senior researcher, he was a member of the Netherlands Institute of Government, the Dutch Research School for Public Administration and Political Science. He's also been a visiting scholar at the American University in Washington, D.C., and an Erasmus teacher since the year 1997, having lectured on international relations and organizations at various European universities, among them Agder University College in Kristiansand, Norway, and the Institut d'études politiques in Grenoble, France. Bob now will be giving a conference on pandemics as global challenges and the international crisis in health management. Bob, again, thanks for accepting this invitation. We are eager to hear you, to listen to your wise words. And as you conclude your presentation, we are having a Q&A session. So we already invite each and everyone to send your comments, to send your questions through our chat box on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Professor Reinalda. Dear Bob, we can't hear you yet. Please don't forget to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, definitely.
That's much better. Okay, good morning to everyone, and thank you for your kind words, both Assis and Davison, and congratulations with your series. I'm really happy to have known you for such a long time, and also enjoyed visiting your university in 2015. Well, editing a book is an intensive job, let alone editing 6 volumes with 130 authors from all over the world. So there's only one thing I can say: congratulations. And thank you very much for this kind invitation. Well, I hadn't thought so much about pandemics as global challenges, but well, was forced to do so. My research at the moment focuses on executive heads of IGOs, the directors general, secretaries general, their leadership, and the international secretariat where they are working. It's the institutional context that allows them to do certain things. This is the IO-Bio project that Davison already mentioned, and this is a book about the international secretariats that I published recently. Now, COVID-19 is causing a worldwide crisis, as we all know. But how do IOs handle such crises? For me, it was a kind of new topic, although I know something about them, but crisis management by IOs and their secretariats. International crises do require responses by international organizations. It's an institutional response, and the leadership is important, but it has to improvise in a very short time and they have to take crucial decisions. However, crisis management is an under-researched subfield of international relations, and IGOs have been absent from crisis management studies. The main focus of crisis management studies is on national political systems. So I raised the question of what do we know and what do we have? So political leadership in times of crisis, very briefly here, is in the security field. You get a centralization of leadership to the highest organizational levels. There is information management, which is crucial, communication, both internally in the organization and externally. And you all know the book Essence of Decision-Making by Graham Allison and the problems he signaled, which are known as groupthink or Europolitics. Although nationally, it probably is also true in IOs. Now let me summarize the 5 essential steps in political crisis management. Making sense of a crisis is the first thing. Then you have to shape responses. And what we know is that coordination problems are huge. Then you have to provide an account of what is going on. Just think about the present health situation. And later we have to return to normal and finally to learning. The Oxford Handbook of Political Leadership has a very good chapter on this where you find these 5 essential steps. But what about crisis management in the United Nations system, UN system? Well, I can think of 4: humanitarian emergencies, security crisis, health epidemics, and also environmental disasters. But I will only say something about the first 3, and you see here a chart of all the UN specialized agencies. Okay, humanitarian emergencies. We have specific agencies which deal with them. UNICEF, the High Commissioner for Refugees, or the World Food Programme. And in 1991, the UN created some coordination mechanisms to ensure coherent responses to these kind of emergencies. So this was obviously created in the early 1990s. So OCHA is a good example of it, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. It's part of the UN Secretariat, and we have Emergency Relief Coordinator, working with the UN Secretary General and the Interagency Standing Committee. So you see, interagency refers to coordination. Here you have some of them. The first one was Jan Eliasson. You know, of course, Sergio Vieira de Mello and Valerie Amos, and the present one is Mark Lowcock. But we have specific coordinators. So these are strong elements of the steps 1 and 2, shaping responses and coordination. What about the Security Council? Do we have that? Well, there are at least 2 authors, Peter Wallenstein and Ellen Ravendal, and then they argue there is a kind of system. It starts with agenda diplomacy, finding the relevant information about conflicts, disseminating this information to important actors, and also active mediation. Then we get a kind of agreement diplomacy in which the authority of the UN Secretary General is really important because the authority allows him, not yet her, to do certain things which are important. And the UN Secretary is a bit the guardian of the charter, of the UN Charter. So there are all these meetings behind the scenes where the Secretary General has special representatives, etc., but they try to find a solution. And the bully pulpit means that the Secretary General can address any audience he thinks is important. And then we have the third phase, which is implementation diplomacy. Then there is a course of action. It's recommended by the UN Secretary General, and the Security Council or the General Assembly take resolution, and peacekeeping and peace building are the consequences of it. So I would argue there is an ongoing mechanism. It covers long time periods, so it goes over long time, and it has recognizable responsibilities around the Secretary General. Okay, what about epidemics and pandemics? Does the World Health Organization have strong outbreak and coordination capacities, similar to OCHA or the ERC? And what about the Director General of the World Health Organization? Is he or she the guardian of the international health regulations? Okay, I'll give you my short answer. Better avoid the pandemic, as the mechanism is not fit for it. I will demonstrate. So the question also is, if this is the case, can we expect reform? And I hope to end somewhat positively. So international crisis management in health. Yes, it exists, an international crisis management mechanism. However, it's weak, it's complicated, barely visible, and strongly politicized. And both the organization and the Director General are poorly equipped to run the mechanism. Here you have some of the Directors General of the World Health Organization I mentioned come now on purpose, but we had Brundtland, Lee Yong-wook, Margaret Chan, and Tedros at the moment. Now, the core of the mechanism is the World Health Organization and its health regulations, which were defined for the last time in 2005. A few corrections afterwards, but this is the essential thing. So the World Health Organization, since 1948, has normative power. It can adopt regulations which assume a binding force, although states have a right to opt out, and they, of course, do. And we have the international health regulations. There, the Director General can determine whether a reported event, an epidemic, pandemic, constitutes a, as it's called, public health emergency of international concern. And when he does so, he can issue temporary recommendations. Now we've had many epidemics and also pandemics, and so far we have had 6 of these emergencies of an international concern. I'm not going to discuss them all, but you know, the swine flu, Ebola, Zika, and of course, now COVID-19. So what are the conditions for international crisis management in health? They're all unfavorable. We have very decentralized structures. The Pan American Health Organization as part of the WHO. There are many organizations, so structures are decentralized. We have strong national control over the international regulations. States are very eager to keep their control. We have competing goals, medical expertise, but we also have economic effects which impact trade, transport, tourism, etc. And we have north-south controversies. So the conditions are not very good. And the institution itself also shows many shortcomings. First of all, it's a matter of lacking funding and lacking operational capacity. It's a very poor organization in this respect. Then our national core capacities to be able to act when you have a pandemic, as required by the international health regulations, they remain too weak. So there are no national investments in outbreak identification and response programs. This is also true, I found out, for the Netherlands under the present conditions, and I didn't know it was that bad. So the core capacities at the national level remain too weak. Then the DG is not able to ensure that governments report outbreaks quickly, as they are supposed to do. So they either act too early, and then the member states are angry, or they act too late, and then the states are also angry. There is no compliance monitoring mechanism. Well, there were several improvements, which I'm not going to discuss. Some of you may know these acronyms, but they often are little more than patch-ups, and that also complicates the processes. So there was something I wasn't really aware of, but when I started looking at it, and that's the ongoing UN involvement since roughly 2000. So the UN is also playing a role that I would expect the WHO would play. Now, this all means politicization, and that is a complication as well. So, for example, in 2000, infectious diseases became seen as a security threat. I'm not going into what happened at the time, but suddenly health issues became something that was seen through the eyes of security. The security definition in 2004 was broadened by including health. So security now suddenly had a health dimension. Responses to outbreaks are seen in enforcement terms. How can you enforce certain policies? And we suddenly had a UN coordinator for the avian flu. In 2005, David Nabarro was appointed as such. He is from the World Health Organization, but he now became a UN coordinator. He had to find the resources through the World Bank, and a coordination center was put up at the FAO. So it's all very complicated. Health even became a standing item in the agenda of the General Assembly. This happened in 2009. And we also had a first field operation in health, not by the WHO, but set up by the Secretary General of the United Nations. All good intentions, but very complicated. Now, the role of the WHO and its Director General was seriously limited. So there is a transfer of responsibility, resulting in the UN taking center stage in global health policy making. So policy making is no longer the core of the WHO, and that implies a limited WHO role. The UN involvement reduced the decision-making role of the organization and its executive head. So the WHO had its place in preparatory processes or in implementation tasks, which means it didn't have to say so much about what was going on. So this is why I argue that the WHO UN crisis mechanism is not the ideal system for pandemic preparedness and response, and that are the essential steps, essential moments when we have a pandemic. And the DG is not the guardian of the international health regulation, although I will show you a positive sign in that respect. But if you want to know how this increase in politicization took place, compare two handbooks. The first edition of the Oxford Handbooks on the United Nations, edited by Tom Weiss and Sam Dawes, in 2007, with the version in the second edition of 2018. And you will be astonished what changed in that relatively short period. It was written by Gianluca Burki, and I think he is very well equipped to say something about this because he was a former WHO legal counsel. But just as an indication, two texts from two different time moments, and also a different perspective on the covers of these two handbooks. COVAX, yes, but. So COVAX is the correct multilateral form of cooperation. That is what we need to do for fair and equitable access to tests and vaccines. It's of course more complicated because COVAX is only the vaccines pillar of ACT accelerator, but I'm just focusing here on COVAX. You can hear my clocks. However, we also have vaccines nationalism. And my expectation is that vaccines nationalism will seriously weaken future multilateralism, unfortunately. But there is division between countries, there's division between regions, and it will end up in reduced confidence of multilateral efforts. So this is a very sad thing. Now, the good thing is we have 4 approaches to reform the World Health Organization. Here you have Kelly Lee and Julian Piper, and they wrote an article in Global Governance 2020, probably number 4, and they see 4 approaches. And they have the analogy with an aging computer, what to do with your old computer. Should you throw it away? Should you replace it, fix up, etc. So the first approach is time for retirement. Bye-bye WHO. However, the chances for a WHO 2.0 are really small at the moment, given the relationships between the great powers and also between the middle powers. So time for retirement is one option, but it will create a very weak situation. So what we could do is we could also refurbish the organization, and we add on certain elements that are now very weak, a stronger coordinator or anything like that. But that actually is the WHO history, and it may complicate the mechanism even further. So I don't know whether it will really help. It will happen, and sometimes it will be good, but in the end it remains very complicated. Another idea is to see the WHO as a coordinator of networks of international organizations, such as ACT COVAX facility. This was launched by the Director General of the organization, and it also depends on trust in the leadership of the organization. So here the Director General has some authority, and that can help to promote this aspect. Very interesting. And then we can also think of a very, well, huge innovation in global health governance when this COVID-19 has gone. We should understand where is the fragility of the system, and we should try to think out of the box or beyond the present dysfunctionality. This is not easy, but it is a challenge. I like the article because you have these 4 approaches. Let me add something from my perspective of intergovernmental organization and its leadership. Now, when an IGO is under stress, and think of the World Trade Organization at the moment, what can we expect? Will it end? Will the organization die? Or will it fight back? And I argue that IGOs under stress are expected to fight back, to adapt, and to attempt to survive. The UNDP has in such a situation, even the ILO has been in such a situation, and nowadays the WTO, but also the World Health Organization. So when we want to have an organization trying to survive, we need leadership qualities. The executive head needs to be an internal leader, mobilizing all the different departments to work on how to survive, which are our weak points, which are our stronger points. So that is internally, but also externally, you must be a smart player in international relations, both with states that support you and with other international organizations. Of course, there are more factors, external factors, but the essence starts with leadership. One of the things is you need to find more operational support. This is something the WHO has done by creating this global outbreak alert and response network, GOARD. There are more examples to be mentioned, but you need to organize your support. You also need to be a coordinator of all the partners, or if you want, stakeholders and their networks. These are the NGOs, the private foundations, epistemic communities, and also secretariats of other IGOs, because if you have a network in which one international organization wants to play a role, you better have good contacts with other secretariats. And this is actually what the Director General of the World Health Organization is doing. This is not always easily recognizable because it's very difficult to see what is taking place within organizations, let alone within networks, but leadership of IOs is doing something like that. So network coordination is one activity. Preparing reform to empower your own IGO is another one. And I argue that at the moment, Tedros is preparing such reform. And that's a very interesting international actor. That's the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. He established this, and 2 very qualified women, Helen Clark from New Zealand and Elson Johnson Sirleaf from Liberia, are the co-chairs, and there are 11 qualified panel members. Here are the 2 leaders, the 2 co-chairs, and they follow the COVID-19 process and the decisions that are taken by the WHO, the UN, and other organizations closely, and they assess it very openly. So their reports will form a basis for reform / innovation, as argued in the article, however difficult it is. There are not these many instances of such an independent panel. I think the name is also very important, and the two leaders, the two women, are very good in expressing their things. You can find all their documents on this website, theindependentpanel.org, and it's really fascinating to see how they discuss things, how they provide all the information about what they are doing. So let me stop here, as the independent panel is such an excellent and positive initiative. I can only say, follow them. Go to there, you can give up your email address, and then you will get all the information. It's fascinating, and it brings some hope. So I would say all best wishes for your book series, and thank you for your attention. And now it will be time for Q&A, and I will switch off my screen. Here I am.
Wonderful, Dr. Reinalda. Wonderful presentation. Fascinating arguments put forth. And you have given us a lot. So there will be many questions. But first, please let me do some advertisement. I am happy to let you all know that our book series is already available for download. And this is the best piece of news. It's for free, at least for a while. So you can all head to www.ufmg.br/DRI/Desafios Globais. So this is the official website for you to download the 6 books of our book series. Do it as soon as you can. Our print version will be out within a couple of months, most probably, but the PDF version is already at the reach of your computer, your phone. So it's easy to get the 6 books right now as we talk. Professor Reinalda, let's talk IOs and international preparedness to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. While you were given this great presentation and touching on so many different topics, I have been formulating different questions for you, but interestingly enough, you always seem to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of me, because I was formulating and you kept coming up with the answers in advance. It's an interesting thing, because it's telling of your capacity to see the whole picture and to provide us with an encyclopedic outline of this problem. And so I'll try to surprise you now and raise one topic which you might not have touched on. I'm referring to, and this is one problem that Aziz and I will have come across during the elaboration of this book series. At the very inception, we kept thinking of ways to tackle or to address global challenges while not leaving aside regional variables, local variables. It's hard, it's really hard to deal with all at once, I mean, global aspects of a problem, as well as the regional, very peculiar aspects of this problem. And when one speaks of this COVID-19 pandemic, it's easy to identify how this problem might manifest. The variety of governmental and societal responses to this pandemic is a good illustration. It showcases how hard, how complex it is to provide a truly global response. So how would you suggest that we face this problem, assuming that this is really something that we can adequately cope with? How do you deal with the global aspects and the regional aspects all at once and still remain effective?
Yes, that's a very good question. Let me say that I sent you a print of the PowerPoints, and I assume that you can put them somewhere on a website for those who would like to have it as well. Yeah, the regional aspect is a good one and a problematic one as well. First of all, a pandemic, as the word already says, it's a worldwide crisis, so you need a worldwide answer. But I think that it's also a division within regional organizations. The African Union or sub-African regions are dealing with the same problem, because which countries come first and which come later? Is there a common mechanism? Is there a kind of coordinator? Is that available or is it not? And if you look at the European Union, in our case, it also illustrated that we are a common market and a little bit more, but not in the field of health. And suddenly we have all kinds of distinctions between the richer countries or the very egoistic countries. I can mention the Netherlands as a good example of egoism, because the first thing we did was trying to buy vaccine or tests at the beginning for ourselves. And then we suddenly realized, France is doing the same, Germany is doing the same. Then there is, of course, external divisions that arise, because should we use help from, should we accept help from China or help from Russia, which took place in Italy, in northern Italy, and Bergamo, when it was in a hard situation and the EU Commission was not doing anything and the Council was hesitating? Or should we accept help in the Russian vaccine? So the complication dimension is that it's not only global, but it's also at the regional. So what we can expect is that health will be on the agenda of regional organizations, and then that already is a problematic situation, but they also have to coordinate with the very complex global situation. So that would be my answer without having the questions. When will it actually take place? What kind of actors are available? But it will play a role, you're correct.
And the interesting thing is that you can see different bureaucratic cultures inside one country. Take mine, Brazil. Until recently, we used to enjoy a good reputation in terms of public health management. And we were proud of this. We treasured our unified system for public health, which aspires to have global coverage and reach more than 200 million Brazilians at the end of the day. But now, as the current president of Brazil took office, those who were in charge of public health management, they were replaced by military. Literally, I'm speaking literally now. So the military are in charge of the health ministry, and it's an entirely different bureaucratic culture. And I mean, the outcome is quite tangible and not so good for now. Let me ask you another question, because you have touched on this, the rise of China, and how does it impact the whole multilateral complex? Do you see any connection between a Chinese national citizen to take up a headship position, or an ally of the Chinese government to be at the head of the WHO at this moment, and the politicization, the polarization that came about? I would like you to give us some thoughts on this, on the rise of China and the impact over the multilateral system.
Yes, I'll say something, but also on the army, because we had to find out that we don't have anymore any doctor responsible for health matters in our Ministry of Health. There was a lot of decentralization, and the bureaucratic structures were all devised. And now the question was, how are we going to organize our vaccination? And then the army said, listen, during the Mexican flu, we organized all the logistics for the vaccination campaign, and that was very good. There were also lessons learned, but they didn't exist anymore. And the government did not accept the army to have a role and said, we can do it. Well, the last 6 weeks, we have every week, or sometimes a few times a week, we have new plans about the strategy. So now there's finally, once high civil servant said, we should have organized this differently. So we are missing the army because of its logistics experience. But of course, that's a different situation in your country. About China, well, that brings us to the shifts or the power struggles taking place between the United States and China, to put it simply. It's a little bit more complicated, but if we take them, I see two things with regard to multilateralism. The first one is that the Trump administration has played a very bad role in multilateralism by leaving organizations or threatening to leave them, including the WHO, other international treaties. So that has changed the situation in there. And then I started to study a while ago, what is the attitude of the People's Republic of China towards the UN? Well, to put it very simple, originally it wasn't in because it was Taiwan. Then in the early 70s, with the change of Henry Kissinger and Nixon, the People's Republic became in. But it was a poor country. It was not engaged in very much, although it had a position in the Security Council as one of the P5. And what you see is that they started to become slowly, very slowly, more active. And you can see that there are certain phases. But the essential one for the last, let's say, 20 years is that they started to study how is the UN functioning? What is happening at conferences? And then they became more and more interested in, let's say, playing a role. And this was at two levels. The first level is the Security Council, where they had only a few vetoes, but all the vetoes dealt with Taiwan. So that is a very, an exclusion of an existing country, which they consider as a province. So that has a specific attitude. And the second is that at the level of international organizations, they began to look for positions as executive head. So the first one was the WHO with Margaret Chan. And the interesting thing was that in the flu epidemic of 1997 in Hong Kong, she killed all the poultry. And when she was in for a promotion, China said, oh, no, this is not going to happen. So in the early 2000s, China was not in favor of it. But slowly it started to change, and this is stronger under Xi, so 2013, and Xi is after positions in organizations. So this would then happen already for the first time in 2006, when they supported as the position of Chan as Director General. And now they do something very smart, which I think they are also doing in the Belt and Road Initiative, is that they organize support. So when the election of Chan was there, they had a meeting, a summit, the China-African summit, 4 days before, and guess what? Chan had all the African votes. And I can argue that, well, there is a game, we call it the election of the executive head of specialized agencies. And then I would argue China is playing this game much smarter than the West, or how you want to call it. And this is true for the International Telecommunications Union, the FAO. So the dramatic effects of the US government has an influence on China on the multilateral platform. Okay, bit of a long answer, but that would be my essence. And to connect it with health, the visit of this group of scientists to Wuhan is exactly on the edge. What is China? What does it allow and what doesn't? So there we can see what it will be. And I was very much interested to see that the independent panel of these two women, that they spoke about it openly, which I think is essential for the world and also for science. Hope that answers your question.
Great answer, and you have pinpointed very interesting facts, and you have shed light on the fact that China has just become a champion of multilateralism, which is something new for my generation. Please allow me to invite my friend and editor of the book series, Professor Saliba. He's got a question.
Well, first of all, Professor Bob Reinalda, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. We are always delighted to hear you. The question that I have here actually comes from the audience. It's by Mr. Frederico Duboc. He is the editor of the newspaper O Tempo, a very important newspaper here in the state of Minas Gerais. And the question is the following. Just 1 second here. Here it is. Countries like Russia, India, China, and the US seem to perceive vaccines as capabilities from a realistic standpoint, and now have a dispute over power gains in the system based on those vaccines. Does this create dilemmas for action by the World Health Organization, as actions for pandemic control would have implications for the balance of power?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it also illustrates the situation where we are living in, because in the original idea of sovereign states, the idea was, of course, that every sovereign state was able to produce the vaccines or the tests or whatever you need. And we suddenly found out that we have brought a lot of factories, health and medicine production lines far away to either China or India, and that states do not longer control that. So if you have a division between groups of countries with certain facilities and others who don't have it, that of course creates a situation which complicates debates within an organization. At the same time, I would argue, I would not know any other level or any other platform where to discuss that. I don't think it's the market. Market forces will play a role, because when you have a product and many people want to have it, you can make good profits. And there are also politicians who profit from it as well. But from the perspective of the WHO, you are going into a process of transformation, of innovation, and you know that you have these kind of divisions. However, I would also argue that a good leader of the WHO, who is able to understand what kind of relations there are, also creates a kind of, well, window of opportunity. So in my vision, I would argue international organizations are also actors, and also actors that can develop policies. Of course, if we have weak leadership, the outcomes will be different than when we have strong leadership. So I hope that this answers the question, but yes, interesting to see how power politics always matter also for institutionalists.
Answers very well indeed. And I do have another question. It is from one of our contributors, Pedro Matos. He's from Cape Verde. And the question he poses is, how can the lack of global coordination hamper access to vaccines for poor countries, particularly African countries?
Yes, I can imagine this question and the situation which is created. I must confess that in the beginning, I was too optimistic about COVAX. And I didn't really think it through. I explained what COVAX was and everything around it to my students, and they didn't know about COVAX, but that's what I say. It's always very difficult to see what's going on at an international level, but COVAX was okay. And the best thing that you can say is, okay, we give some money, but our vaccines first. So that is the situation in which we landed. And you could argue, if there is a hegemon or a group of countries who agree about a certain policy, then there is a bigger probability that you will get it effective, even if in the end it's not, well, it will be a compromise and it will be weaker, but then you would at least have a mechanism going on. But under the present situation, where all the countries, including my own country, are very egoistic, yeah, then it won't help.
Bob, there's one more question by Maria Cristina Carvalho, which is an interesting one because it makes reference to each one of us educators. She's asking, what role is left to us in the fighting of the future pandemics, this and the future ones? So how should we behave? What should we do? How can we help for the future fighting of pandemics?
Yeah, so the first one is the cluster around the WHO. But is there also a role for UNESCO? Is there something that we need to explain in education? How does the world work? How does it function? What kind of organizations do we have? How good is their behavior? Where are the weak sides? So I would say for educators, there is a specific role. Also, because at the present situation, if children and young people cannot go to their schools and to their universities, we are already having a very big handicap in these generations. And one of the things we have to do is not only think about our health system, but also about our educational system. What are the weaknesses? What will happen in another pandemic? So there is a role in understanding, trying to understand it and trying to explain it to both our national systems, educational system, and also to the pupils and the students themselves. So I hope that students will also make analysis of this pandemic and contribute to solutions.
Excellent, excellent. So we're coming to a close after this great presentation and the great lecture that you gave. And after so many questions, I want to ask if Aziz would like to give some final words, maybe.
I just want once again to thank Professor Bob Reinalda for the excellent presentation, to thank our friends at Editora UFMG in the person of Flávio Carsalade, the director, and additionally to thank my two friends and companions in this incredible journey, Professor Davidson Belém Lopes, to whom I'm very grateful for all the work and for the friendship we have had all these years, and Professor Sandra Almeida for the support.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Saliba. And Bob, I couldn't be more thankful to you than I am now. Thank you for your time, for all your dedication, and for really preparing this great presentation, for thinking over the subject and coming up with something original and very nice, really nice. We have had a great time listening to you, and I hope that we can connect anytime soon in person, right? It's time. But there will be a future, and in this future, we'll be together again, co-sharing the environment. This is what I look forward to.
I fully agree, and thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm really glad to see all your faces. And having heard all the questions. Thank
you. Thank you very much. Muito bem, então, de volta ao português, eu quero agradecer de coração a todos os que participaram deste empreendimento. Foi uma experiência transformadora para mim, eu falo isso certamente em nome do Aziz também, eu posso dizer. Lidar com 130 autores dos backgrounds mais distintos, áreas de formação, nacionalidades, enquadramentos científicos, foi realmente uma tarefa e tanto, mas foi muito recompensador. E a partir de agora, como eu dizia anteriormente, os livros estão disponíveis ao alcance da navegação do computador de vocês. Vocês podem fazer o download no site www.ufmg.br/dri/desafios globais. Está lá tudo à disposição, 6 livros, 80 capítulos, 2.000 páginas e tudo o que vem junto com isso. Vamos encerrando, então, essa cerimônia, agradecendo novamente e esperando contar com vocês, com todo o apoio, todo esse empuxo tão positivo que você sempre tem dado à DRI. Muito obrigado e até a próxima. Um abraço a todos.